Imagine walking down a city street and seeing piles of cash rotting in the gutter. Thousands, perhaps millions, soaking in the mud. But here's the twist. Nobody is stealing it. Pedestrians act like it is invisible. They step over it, ignoring it like a discarded candy wrapper. In any other nation, finding a stack of cash is a lottery win. But in this specific country, it is a cruel joke. This isn't a scene from a post-apocalyptic fiction. This is the modern reality of a nation that, on paper, possesses the ingredients to be the wealthiest superpower on Earth. We are looking at an economy where money became trash, and trash became a necessity. A place where the currency is so worthless, street vendors weave it into handbags because the paper value exceeds the face value. Welcome to the paradox. Welcome to the investigation of how a country sitting on a literal ocean of black gold went from importing Cadillacs to starving in the dark. This is the story of Venezuela. Before we dissect the body of this economy, you need to understand the scale of the crime scene. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. We are talking about 300 billion barrels of crude oil beneath the ground. That is 18% of all known global reserves. That is more than Saudi Arabia, more than the United States, more than Russia. By every metric of economic logic, every citizen here should be living in absolute luxury. The government should be drowning in so much capital that poverty is mathematically impossible. And yet, the data paints a terrifying picture. According to the Encovi Household Survey, by 2019, poverty had climbed above 90%. How does a nation possess a fortune worth trillions, yet its people are weighing money on scales instead of counting it? This is the paradox of wealth. It is a financial thriller where the villain isn't a single man but a catastrophic economic suicide. Today on Cashverse, we are exposing the anatomy of a collapse. To understand the death of this economy, we have to look at the addiction that started it. For decades, oil wasn't just a commodity for Venezuela. It was a magic wand. In the mid-20th century, this nation was the Saudi Arabia of the West. When oil prices surged, the government felt invincible. During the boom years, the leadership made a fatal calculation. They'd bet the entire house on black gold. They used massive oil profits to fund extensive social programs and, critically, to import almost everything the country consumed. Why build factories or farms when you can just sell oil and buy food from abroad? It seemed efficient. But this created a fragile illusion. The entire economy was balancing on a single, volatile pillar. Economists call this Dutch disease, because the oil sector was so profitable, it cannibalized capital and labor from every other industry. Domestic production of agriculture, manufacturing, and technology didn't just slow down, it withered and died. By the early 2000s, Venezuela stopped making things. They just pumped oil and spent cash. They built a castle of gold on a foundation of sand, unaware that the tide was about to come in. They had handed over their economic sovereignty to the global oil market. And markets, as we know, are merciless. The thriller takes its darkest turn in 2014. Global oil prices crashed. Almost overnight, the revenue stream that kept the country on life support was severed. The barrel price plummeted, and the budget deficit exploded. Suddenly, the government couldn't afford to import food or medicine. They couldn't keep the lights on. The logical move was austerity and restructuring. Instead, the government committed the cardinal sin of economics. They tried to print their way out of debt. This is where the tragedy accelerates into a disaster. The central bank began printing money to cover the deficit. But remember, thanks to Dutch disease, there was no domestic production. You had a flood of new cash chasing a shrinking supply of goods. This triggered a feedback loop from hell. By late 2016, hyperinflation had taken hold. But the numbers from 2018 are the stuff of nightmares. The IMF estimated inflation reached 1 million%. Let me put that in perspective. In late 2017, a cup of coffee cost 2 Sanlingling bolivars. By August 2018, that same cup cost 2 million bolivars. Prices weren't rising by the year. They were doubling every few weeks. The currency was losing value so fast that shopkeepers stopped using price tags entirely. By 2019, the economy had lost more than half its size compared to 2013. This effectively murdered the bolivar. And this brings us back to the image of the gutter. The currency became so worthless that it lost its function as a medium of exchange. It became cheaper to use banknotes as raw material than to buy actual supplies. We saw reports of artists and desperate citizens taking stacks of high-denomination bills money that once represented a month's salary and weaving them into purses and baskets. Think about the absurdity. A weaver would use hundreds of banknotes to make a small bag, then sell that bag for a few US dollars to a tourist. The value was in the labor, not the money. The paper was worth more than the number printed on it. In August 2018, the government tried a desperate reset. They slashed 5 zeros off the currency and introduced the Bolívar soberano, but it was like putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound. Trust was gone. We saw citizens weighing cash on deli scales because counting it took too long. When money is measured by weight rather than value, the economy has flatlined. It is a surreal, dystopian reality where the ultimate symbol of wealth, cash, becomes a symbol of absolute failure. The economic theory is fascinating, but the human reality is devastating. The paradox of wealth isn't just about numbers. It is a humanitarian crisis in a land of plenty. Remember that 90% poverty rate? That represents millions of human beings. The average Venezuelan lost nearly 20 pounds of body weight in a single year during the height of the crisis, a phenomenon grimly nicknamed the Maduro diet. We saw a middle class vanish. Professors, doctors, and engineers found themselves scavenging for food. The contrast is what makes this so difficult to process. You have a nation standing on top of 300 billion barrels of oil, literally standing on a fortune, while its citizens are forced to eat from garbage bags. The infrastructure crumbled. Massive power outages left the country in darkness for days. This economic collapse triggered one of the largest migrations in Latin American history. Millions fled the country, walking thousands of miles, not because of a war, but because their money had died. Venezuela's story is a warning to the world. It exposes the fragility of modern economies and the danger of relying on a single resource. It shows us how quickly rich can become destitute when the fundamentals are ignored. The paradox of wealth is that having everything can sometimes lead to having nothing. The oil is still there, underground, waiting. But until the economic foundation is rebuilt, it remains a buried treasure in a graveyard of currency. So the next time you see a piece of trash on the street, remember Venezuela. Remember that in the wrong economic conditions, that candy wrapper could be worth more than the money in your pocket. I want to hear from you. Is the resource curse inevitable for oil-rich nations, or was this purely a failure of leadership? Let me know in the comments. If you found this investigation eye-opening, hit like and subscribe to Cash First. We'll see you in the next deep dive.